Sure, thank you for your patience. Huh? Are you ready? Okay. Today is Tuesday, November 29th. We are at the advisory committee meeting for the Cemetery and Funeral Bureau. It is 10:15 a.m. and we are at the Department of Consumer Affairs building, the El Dorado room, room number N220, 1625 North Market Boulevard in Sacramento, California, 95834. Before I kind of go into our first agenda item, I would like to explain to you the delay. You'll notice, probably all of you know this by now, that we have 3 committee members that are not in attendance today. They were flying in from Ontario, California, and there was a mechanical issue with the plane that first delayed their flight till 10 o'clock and then 11 o'clock, and then it made no sense for them to come since our meeting would be over. I was trying to accommodate their request to participate by teleconference. We did make arrangements to do that, and as I was sitting here talking to our legal counsel, who keeps me out of trouble, it's something we can't do. We follow the Bagley-Keene Open Meetings Act. By policy, we follow it, and in order to teleconference, the locations where they are on their phone must be noticed 10 days in advance, like any other meeting notice. And obviously that wasn't done because this was just something that happened this morning. So Angelique was good enough to say that you would be in violation of that. I'm advising you that. I chose not to continue with that. The department's policy is that we follow that, and so that's why I had to take a step back and not, unfortunately, have them participate in that manner. So I will follow up with them afterwards. We will have meeting minutes. They can certainly watch the webcast now. This isn't a lengthy agenda, and some of them are just updates, so it's unfortunate that they couldn't be here, but it made no sense for them to get on a plane at 11 or 12 when the meeting's over. So anyway, that being said, I felt like you needed that explanation. Anything else? Okay, great, thank you. So anyway, thank you everybody for coming. I think by now everybody knows me, but for those of you that don't, my name is Lisa Moore, and I am the Chief of the Cemetery and Funeral Bureau. I have several of my staff here today. Dave Edwards is my supervising auditor, he's right there. And to my left is Cheryl Jenkins, she's our legislative analyst. And Angelique Scott is to my right, she is our assigned legal counsel. And I think I have 2 staff from Department of Consumer Affairs in attendance. Could you please identify yourselves and say who you are?
Taylor Schick, I'm the department's budget officer.
John Budd, Board Bureau Relations Manager.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to go around and have the committee members introduce themselves.
My name is Darren Draving. I'm the President and CEO of Florida Memorial Parks and Mortuaries in Los Angeles, California.
I'm Suzette Sherman, and I am founder and CEO of SevenPonds.com. We're a website that provides information and resources on end of life.
My name is Maria Mangini. I'm the director of the Family Nurse Practitioner Program at Holy Names University in Oakland, and I'm part of the palliative and hospice staff at Stanford University Hospital.
My name is Chris Dunhost. I am a funeral home liaison with Sierra Donor Services. We're one of 4 organ procurement organizations here in the state of California. We're also responsible for tissue, ocular donation, and transplantation.
Well, thank you for those introductions, and thank you for being here. So, as you can tell, this meeting is being webcast, and it will eventually be posted to YouTube so that folks can choose to watch it later if they'd like to. And while we anticipate webcasting all of our meetings, we will do so as long as we have the staff and the facilities and the resources to do so. And you'll hear me say this at every meeting as well, that this is a working committee, and I do appreciate your participation and discussion of the agenda items. Additionally, if any committee members have any items that they think would be worthy of being included on the agenda, I'd like you to let me know that at any time. You can email me, telephone me, and we can discuss whether it's appropriate to add it on the agenda and for discussion in this forum. Restrooms are located in the lobby. There's a cafe down on the first floor if anybody wants or needs anything. At this time, I would ask you to put your cell phones, tablets, or any other electronics on silent for the duration of this meeting. Did you raise your hand earlier? Okay, all right. I thought you were like, just waving at me.
Thank you.
Okay, just want to make sure. Okay, so let's move on to agenda item number 2, and I always provide you with an update on things that are going on that are pretty significant with the Bureau. So at our last meeting, I talked to you about the process of restructuring the Bureau's management positions. So we had the Bureau Chief and the Deputy Chief and a Supervising Auditor. And what I've done is the Bureau is no longer utilizing the Deputy Chief title for one of its positions. Instead, it's using Field Unit Supervisor. And Linda Cassis was in that position, and she remains in that position. But instead of supervising the field staff and all of the office staff, she now manages and supervises the 9 field staff and focuses just on that. What I've done is taken another position that we had, and in July, I promoted Sandy Patterson. Sandy Patterson is our Program Operations Supervisor. She's been with the Bureau for nearly 9 years, and she supervises 8 staff who perform licensing, enforcement, and administrative duties for the Bureau. So what this does is take that burden off of one person with 17 staff and really allows them to manage more effectively, which allows us to do our job more efficiently. It's only been 5 or 6 months, but I can see that it's made a difference already. So it's, I think it was a very good move for the Bureau. And also, I'm very pleased to announce that I hired a new supervising auditor, Dave Edwards. I just introduced him earlier. Dave was promoted to this position in late July and filled behind Chip Bain, who retired in April of this year. And he was an auditor for the Bureau for about 3 years, and just brings a great deal of knowledge and experience with him to this position. And I'm very pleased to have him as part of my management team. And then finally, we hired an associate auditor to fill behind Dave because he was promoted. So Ramunda Smith joined us recently, just like literally last week. So she's new, she's being trained. You should be familiar with her. At some point, you might be able, can expect to hear from her. She does desk audits and eventually field audits. We're currently recruiting to fill one more vacancy in our audit unit, an entry-level auditor position. And interviews have been conducted, and we're very close in selecting somebody.
We are. 2 people are being checked for eligibility right now.
Great. So hope to have that. Then we'll be fully staffed, and we hope that nobody leaves. You know, there can be a lot of movement in civil service because we are a small bureau compared to a lot of other agencies out there. So sometimes there's more opportunities to promote in some larger agencies, and we just, with a staff of 22 or 23, there's, sometimes you can have a lot of movement, people looking to move up that career ladder, and it's not always available when you're in a small bureau. But okay, I want to talk about exam development. As you know, I've talked about at other meetings that we have, it's a constant process that we're working on for the 5 different exams that we give. Funeral director, embalmer, crematory manager, cemetery manager, and cemetery broker. So each fiscal year, we work on different exams. It's just kind of an ongoing process each fiscal year, just a different exam that we may be working on. So this fiscal year, we're working on the funeral director exam and the cemetery broker exam. And with the funeral director exam, I'll start there first. That's already begun with several workshops because this year requires an occupational analysis. And so and what that is I'm just going to read it to you what our definition is. An occupational analysis defines a profession in terms of the actual tasks that new licensees must be able to perform safely and competently at the time of licensure. In order to develop a fair, job-related, and legally defensible examination, it must be based upon what licensees actually do on the job. So these are done every 5 to 7 years, and we're in the cycle now where it's time to do the funeral directors. As I said, we've held 2 workshops to do that. Over the next several months, licensed funeral directors will be receiving a letter asking them to complete an online survey. We hope that they all participate. It's only so many that actually have to in order to have relevant statistics and move forward. That information is compiled and organized and analyzed by the Department's Office of Professional Examination Services. And once they will use that to create an exam plan and then a new form of the funeral director examination. So the next step in this process, in order to complete this fiscal year, there's 5 more workshops that need to be held for the funeral director, occupational analysis, and examination development. We will be sending another letter out to licensed funeral directors, giving them the dates of those workshops, and hope that people will respond and want to be a subject matter expert. We can't do it without them. Each workshop requires 6 to 8. I mean, ideally it's 8. Sometimes we've done it with as little as 4. It's not ideal, but it will work. So I feel like if we put those dates out there now, people can kind of pick and choose which ones they might be available to help us with. They're paid a per diem. They're paid a $100 a day honorarium. We make their travel arrangements for them. Most people report that most licensees report that it's informational and educational, and they like to do it. So that's a lot of workshops, and I put that out there so that the word can begin to spread, because without those subject matter experts, we won't be able to hold our workshops. So also, at the end of this year, the end of the fiscal year, probably May or June, we're going to be working on the cemetery broker exam. That one does not require an occupational. Is the question?
Yes. Is anyone else allowed to attend those workshops? Like, for example, would members of this committee be allowed to attend those workshops as an observer?
You have to be a licensed funeral director.
So there's no observation. It's all
No,
participation.
unfortunately not. And those rules are set by the Office of Professional Examination Service. We actually contract with them to perform that work for us. So unfortunately not. And then in May or June, as I said, we'll be working on the cemetery broker examination. That will only require 2 workshops because it's not due for an occupational analysis at this time. So again, as we get closer, I'll be recruiting for that. I don't recruit too far out, because I find when I do that people think it sounds like a good idea at the time, and then when we start making calls to have them participate, they're not able to. So I'll wait until probably March to send that out for the cemetery broker. So I wanted to bring you up to date, especially on that occupational analysis for funeral directors, because we need people to participate, not only as subject matter experts, but that online survey as well. Any questions on any examination development?
Can you give some other examples of other occupations that have an examination of this kind?
I think most all of them have, within the department, a lot of them have an examination. If they give an
Within the
examination.
Department of Consumer Affairs?
Yes, they're required to have an occupational analysis. There's an actual Business of Professions Code section that says what kind of exam development you must have to have your examinations, and that is what we follow. So that's, if I'm incorrect, does that not apply to all the boards and bureaus in the department?
I won't say that all of them necessarily do it, but a majority of the professions have them within the actual department, and there are specific statutory, standards. And there are some that actually utilize the department's occupational OPES department, and others will actually use outside departments. So most of them do just to make sure that the licensees that they're actually staying current with what the expectations are in that specific profession.
I actually have a sort of a different interest in that. This is my second appointment to a state advisory committee by the round. The first one was in the first administration, and it was to the Board of Registered Nursing, to the Midwifery Advisory Committee. And we actually, I think, developed the first occupational analysis-based exam for that. But it was for a credential that didn't exist at that time. It was for the certified midwife in California. And I'm wondering if that if that remains as a route of access for someone to develop, to petition to develop a new credential and develop it through that kind of occupational licensure.
So is your question whether or not the exam can be utilized to?
No, if you wanted to license somebody to do something that you don't have a license for right now, if someone could approach the board to say, we need a license for a specific task or role that does not exist now, and we'd like to do an occupational analysis for that.
That can be taken into consideration. Usually an occupational analysis could be utilized in supporting if you want to move that forward towards the legislature, so that would be a grounds for us.
That's exactly
But then,
the question.
yeah,
Thank
that
you.
board and their bureau would have to look forward and see whether or not they have the actual, that money at that time. If the money that they have has actually been set aside, so usually we have to make sure that they allocate, because usually specific money is set for specific purposes. So that would be one of the avenues towards that.
I see. Thank you.
So just to expand on that a little bit, although we use the department's Office of Professional Examination Services, it is an interagency contract. We do pay for those services, so there is a cost associated with developing our examination. We just use the department rather than go out and solicit a bid for an outside vendor, because the department is able to offer those services, but there is still a cost to the Bureau to do that, so. Any other questions? Can we take questions from the public right now? Okay. Yes.
A question about Business Professions Code that says what's going to be on the test for a field director. There's 4 items. One of them says local health ordinances. How do you deal with that?
Well, that would be dealt with during the occupational analysis. What they look for in that is their survey will say what tasks must you need to know for entry level and what knowledge must you have for entry level into the profession. So if that comes back, I guess you're asking me perhaps, are you asking me if that needs to be changed?
Yeah, I mean, Sacramento may have a health ordinance that affects, but LA may have a separate one, and you can't hardly test that way. So I was thinking it might be something you want to change. Been there forever.
Right,
It's been
right.
there forever, yeah.
Definitely something worth looking at. I can talk to the test validation specialist to bring that up. This would be a good time to bring it forward as they're doing this occupational analysis. So. Anything else? Okay, I'm going to move on to the Endowment Care Fund Sufficiency Report. This is something that the Bureau continues to work on, and we will continue to work on until we submit our report to the legislature in January of 2018. AB 180 was the Bureau's sunset bill, and it requires us to conduct a study on the sufficiency of endowment care funds for future maintenance of cemeteries and report our findings to the legislature. So we've had several meetings on this. We've sent out several letters. We established a focus group that met on August 18th, and then on October 24th, we sent a letter to all licensed endowment care cemeteries asking for specific information about their cemeteries. Now, we're able to use much of the information that we receive when cemeteries file their annual endowment care and special care fund report. We pulled a lot of information off that we already have, but we needed some additional information to move forward with our study. So we sent a letter out asking for information and with the response due date by January 2nd. So once that information is received from all the cemeteries, we'll review it, we'll analyze it, it'll be logged to a spreadsheet. I anticipate that we would meet again with the focus group to discuss those findings and then continue to move forward in compiling an actual report once we have all the data. So, like I said, it's an ongoing project. You'll hear me report on it at the meetings until it's finished. It will be a public document once it's finished, but it is something that we are moving forward with. We're kind of in a holding pattern right now with this until we get the information. We've received some back, which is a good thing, but we need everybody to respond, all the cemeteries to respond and receive it. So I imagine at some point after the first of the year, there may be some follow-up that we need to do for any folks who didn't respond, but we are moving forward with this project. So, any questions on that?
Do you plan to send out a second letter before the due date encouraging participation?
Yeah, I knew that it was, I knew that with the holidays, it's going out the end of October, and we're requesting it back the first part of January. I will either do a letter or a postcard or perhaps some sort of reminder. I know Dave and I talked about this briefly yesterday. If we reach out to one group, we need to reach out to everybody that we sent it to. So it might be more cost efficient for us just to do some brightly colored postcard that says, hey, remember to return this to the Bureau. So will you please put that on our list of items to discuss? Thank you.
So moving on to another area of the audits, our audit unit recently sent out letters to licensed funeral establishments reminding them to file their 2015 pre-need funeral trust fund report and or the declaration of non-reporting status. So licensed funeral establishments are required to file one or the other, or in some cases, both forms depending on what kinds of trusts they hold. So I've asked Dave to briefly talk about the annual funeral pre-need reporting requirements, just to kind of explain that.
So I'm David. So the requirements for reporting for pre-need trust, funeral establishment pre-need trust annual reports is in California Code of Regulations, section 1269. There's also a piece in Business and Professions Code 7737.3. And essentially what those require is every year for funeral establishments that enter into pre-need contract arrangements, whereby they're entering into a contract for merchandise or services to be delivered into the future, and they are accepting funds, right? Those are required to be trusted within 30 days, put into a trust. They can't be taken out until there's lots of rules on this, but until those services or merchandises are provided. And they have to report on those every year to the Bureau. So on the Cemetery and Funeral Bureau's website, if you go into audits and there's a forms section, there are the annual reporting forms for funeral establishments. So it's a funeral establishment. Essentially, it's a financial report that's required every year. Many of you know this, but we don't always get them. So that's why Lisa's asked me to remind folks, right, that those are due on May 1st. There are some stipulations about when they're due, if there's an approved fiscal year reporting period. These details are in that code section that I mentioned, the California Code of Regulations, section 1269. Now, some funeral establishments enter into pre-need arrangements, but they don't actually do pre-need contracts where they take funds. In other words, they sell insurance, or maybe the customer opens up their own, pay on death account in their bank. There's various other ways that these can be accomplished. In those circumstances, and that is actually outlined, there's a different code section, of course. It's BPC, Business and Professions Code 7746, that are exemptions. In other words, there are some instances whereby funeral establishments don't have to submit the required annual report. But in those circumstances, they have to submit a declaration of non-reporting status. So the audit unit has two categories. Those people who have pre-need trust funds and are reporting on those, and those that are filing a report that's basically certifying under penalty of perjury, that no, we're exempt from filing that other annual report. So those are the two that are due every year, so they're both due on May 1st. Now, there is some complexities, and that's why I gave you the code sections. There are some funeral establishments that don't have to individually report because they put their trust funds, they trust to a combined trust. Some people call them master trusts. In those circumstances, that trustee, and this is outlined in that code section, you can read it, and if you have any questions, I'll give you my phone number. But if that master trust or combined trust would then be reporting on all the funeral establishments that are utilizing it. However, it still would be required for that funeral establishment to file a declaration of non-reporting status. So let's give an example. A funeral establishment doesn't have an individual trust. It sends it off to a master trust, right, for trusting of those funds. That master trust, or combined trust as it's called in the code, files an annual report every year that includes all of the funeral establishments for which it is holding funds. But the individual funeral establishment, if you read that code section 7746, which is the Business and Professions Code, it still has to file a declaration of non-reporting status, and what it does on that form, which is on our website, is it checks a box saying we don't have to file an annual report because we have a combined trustee that files it for us, that reports for us. So I think one of the reasons why you wanted me to kind of talk about that is there's some nuances in there, and I think it can be a little bit confusing. However, every year, if you read the code sections, we either need to get a report, an annual report with audited financial statements, or a declaration of non-reporting status. So if you have any questions about that, I think does anybody have any questions now? Because I can try to answer those now.
Does every funeral home fall under that?
Yes. So every funeral home has to either file an annual report or a declaration of non-reporting status. One of those two forms is due every year.
Are there instances where both might be due?
It could be. I mean, there are some funeral, not very often, but some funeral establishments may have had an individual trust in the past where they appointed like 3 trustees, maybe one's the owner of the funeral establishment and then 2 other trustees. And it's kind of a small trust that they were using. They may still have that, although at some point they transition to sending funds to a kind of a combined trust or a master trust. So in that circumstance, the master trust would report on the funds that they're holding for the funeral establishment, along with all the other funds they're holding for other funeral establishments. But this funeral establishment would also be responsible for reporting on its individual trust. So it could be that. Now, I haven't seen much of that. It's probably not that common, because usually if the FD is going to decide to eliminate the administrative and all the extra work that goes with having an individual trust, they're probably going to transfer those funds when they start giving funds to the master trust. They're probably going to transfer those other funds over there. But it's possible. So if you have any questions about this, please call me. My number is 916-574-7884.
You're a brave man.
Well, we'll see. I probably won't get that many.
Dave's been very responsive, and he's taken a lot of calls and is always willing to answer questions, so I'm glad that you put that out there.
Thank you.
Okay.
There's a question.
Yes.
Oh, I had one question. Wasn't there a court case about 4 years ago involving master trust that you all filed? And I never saw the end of that. What happened to that?
Lisa, do you want to?
That matter has been resolved. There were decisions reached with each of the people in that decision, and that has been, I think, a couple years now. So that is all resolved. There's another trust company that is now managing those funds.
Okay. So you got some money returned to you?
The accounts were made whole. The trust fund, anything that was short was made whole. Or like I said, there were actual decisions reached with each defendant that were a little different in what they required, but it's been resolved.
Yeah. I think maybe put on the website that it was resolved in some way, succinct way.
Yeah, I think that there were discussions at one time about whether we were going to, it wasn't done necessarily at that time, and now it's been a couple years if we were going to put anything out there at that time. So it's something I can check with the executive office again.
Mm-hmm. And I also wondered where the insurance come in.
So insurance, if you look at that section, Business and Professions Code, section 7746, that's one of the exemptions, right? So really what it is if you don't physically take money in exchange for a pre-need contract for merchandise and services, then you're probably exempt. And when I say you take, it means you get paid in advance for something that you're going to provide in the future, right? There are, however, many funeral establishments that have licensed insurance agents on their staff. And in that circumstance, the customer is purchasing a life insurance policy, right? There's various options that they can do. But they're purchasing a life insurance policy, so they're not paying the money to the funeral establishment. they're paying it to the insurance agent, which then pays the insurance company. Okay, so again, that's one of the difficulties in trying to explain this verbally, perhaps, is there's a lot of little nuances. So if you have questions specific like that, you can always call me, but take a look at the code section, CCR 1269, BPC 7737.3, and BPC 7746. Those are really the three sections that outline all the details.
Okay,
Does
well,
that help?
just-
Okay.
I just-
So in that circumstance, if they only sold insurance pre-need, then they would be exempt because they wouldn't have a trust, right? They wouldn't have established a trust to put money into. That money would be used to purchase something, and that something that is being purchased is an insurance policy.
Does the agent get any money?
So I don't know the answer to that. I mean, it's likely that they do get commission because they're an insurance agent. But again, in terms of the annual reporting requirements, we're looking at trusting. We're looking at trust funds. And so that's what we're talking about, the requirements for annual reporting on trust funds and the exemptions to that, but still requiring, notifying the Bureau that you're exempt from that annual reporting. Is that
Yeah, I'll
help?
call you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you, Dave. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 3, and the discussion of posting administrative citations to the website. This is I think the third meeting where we've discussed this, but from something has changed from the last time at our meeting, the way the information is going to be displayed, so we wanted to provide you an update with that. So as you know, we currently only post formal administrative actions on the license lookup record. And that formal administrative action is through the Attorney General's office, and we either have a proposed decision or a stipulated decision. And once that matter is finalized, it's posted to our website. Also file the accusation when that's served on the respondent, which is the first step. So you can find those kinds of documents when you go to look at somebody's license record. We have been talking about posting administrative citations to the website and wanted it to post the same way the license discipline is. It's going to take a significant amount of time through our IT division to make that happen. So we're going to post the information, but in a slightly different way. And I wanted Cheryl to kind of just walk you through briefly on what you can expect to see. It'll still be available, just this is just kind of in the interim, we're going to display it a different way.
So at our last meeting, we presented a handout that showed how we plan to display the administrative citations. That has not changed. We were still going to be doing a comprehensive list similar to the disciplinary actions, and it will be in alpha order based upon the licensee or the establishment's name. The only differences are that because these are referencing citations, we will include the citation number, and it will include the violations that were found on that citation, and if there was a fine amount. And then the effective date is the date that we have actually issued the citation to that person or establishment. As we discussed last time and all agreed, these will not be listed on our website until after they're a final action, meaning that any days for appeal have passed, and then they will be posted. The comprehensive list will link to the license number or the license record, and if you click on that, it will take you to the license record. It'll show you their license status. You can see any other information that's up on our website. The only difference at this point in time is that the actual citation document will not be listed on the license record. In the interim, while we have our IT department working on making that change for us, if you would like to see the actual citation, you would just need to submit a public record request, and we'll be happy to provide you that comprehensive document that basically goes into more detail about what specific violation they were cited for. And that is pretty much the only change at this point. Everything else has stayed the same as we've discussed at previous meetings. We did go back to January 1st of 2016 to start this list, and it should be up probably in the next 2, maybe 3 weeks on our website. It'll be accessible under our enforcement and disciplinary actions link. And down at the bottom, you will see administrative citations by year. And if you click on 2016, it'll take you to this list. Below that is our disciplinary actions, which are already up there. And again, those are also listed by year. And
But you have to select by the last name, you know the name?
oh, so because the citation list is a lot lengthier than the disciplinary action list, what we're going to have the IT department do is add at the top the alphabet. So if you know you're looking for an establishment that starts with L, you can click on L and it'll drop you down to that section of the list. You don't have to scroll down through the entire list. Right now, I think we're about 80-ish citations, so the list is going to get a little long. That's just helpful, if you know specifically which section you're looking to find somebody under. Does anybody have questions?
I know that you have institutions that are on this list, but I assume that there also are individuals?
Yes, individuals and establishments.
If you were to, do those individuals show up on California Breeze?
We're not on Breeze.
Or not on Breeze?
The only difference with this is that if we submit a citation to an unlicensed party, that will be listed on here. However, there's not an actual license record to link to. So if you wanted to see that citation, you would just need to request a copy. And I mention that because we do have one unlicensed individual, so that is something you will see on this list when it goes up.
The more frequent thing that we will see will be from the reviews, right, that are done by the field staff that are going out when there's a citation that's issued.
That's what we're talking about. The citations can come from several things. Citations can come from inspections, citations can come from investigations, and citations can come from failing to file the annual reports. So those are typically what you're going to see as far as the issuance of administrative citations on there. And like I said, yes, it's from the field people going out either an inspection or an investigation, or when they fail to file their annual reports every year.
The other thing that we talked about at the previous meeting was a potential considerance for a period of time that would be on the record, and then eventually that might drop off. The other was that it would remain on there essentially forever. So has there been a conclusion?
I don't think that we have a decision yet on how long they're going to remain on there.
And then the last thing is, would it make sense to, similar to how when we go into a eating establishment here in Sacramento County, that there's a pass, right? Because everybody gets inspected, but essentially showing that there was a clear inspection, so that if somebody did want to, a consumer wanted to look and see, and we've got funeral establishments that have citations that are on there, but they're wanting to choose an establishment that maybe is clear. Would it also make sense to show the positive rather than just the negative?
Do you want to answer that?
Well, there's no authority to actually do that. The only reason the information is actually posted on the Bureau's website is because it's statutorily required to. So if for some reason the public and/or the Bureau felt as though there was a need to have a passing grade, then that would require a statutory change to go to the legislature. So it would be probably extreme consumer protection issues that this Bureau would have to defend why they would want to have a passing score. Something like that probably would not necessarily take, because there would be so many factors, individual factors on a licensee's establishment or a licensee's practice. So I do not foresee that. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but no, they can't do it now. If they wanted to, it would be statutory. 3 would be a very large threshold to get that implemented.
I will say that on our license record, we do list for the businesses. We list when they were last
That's
That
the
just means that their
license
license is clear and current, meaning that they've paid their renewal fees for that year.
Not necessarily.
It doesn't have any tie to like an inspection. However, we just said we have about 180 citations that have been issued for 2016, and we have 12,000 licensees. So one can make the assumption that if they've been recently inspected and there's nothing on this list, they didn't have any violations.
Well, not necessarily that they didn't have any violations, but perhaps they didn't rise to the level of an administrative citation. When somebody's issued, let me just talk about inspections. When we go out to inspect, and if there are violations, sometimes they're minor, but we still document everything that we see because that's the way we stay consistent with all of our field staff. You don't get to say this one gets a pass, or I'm not going to write it down. This one doesn't. So they are trained to document what they see out there. If it's minor, they sign on the back of that under penalty of perjury. They sign a statement of correction that says I've made all these corrections and return it to the Bureau. Now we look at that, and before there's ever the issuance of if it's a minor violation, sometimes that will be it. The statement of correction is accepted. If it's, sometimes it might be a warning letter if it's the second time we've seen that, but it's not too egregious. If we see repeat, people typically get an administrative citation when it's a repeat offense. And not just a repeat offense that we've been in there the second time and you've got the same code section. When those inspection reports are reviewed, they're reviewed to the level of, let's say there's a code section that requires you to do 3 or 4 things in there. Okay, so we don't say, well, you've been cited for this code section before. We look at, you've been cited for the code section before, but was the violation within that code section the same as it was last time? So there's a great deal of review that goes into that when we're looking to say, is it a repeat offense and is it of the same thing? The ones that we go in where a GPL, it's the same violation every time, year after year after year. Second or third time, you're going to see probably an administrative citation. But we do utilize what we refer to as progressive discipline. We start with the warning, then we go to citation, then a citation with fine, unless it's so egregious that it warrants an administrative citation and or fine the first time out. So there really is, and I think that's a good point, that Cheryl made with the close to 12,000 licensees. I don't think since we've had our citation program that we've ever issued over 200 citations in any given year. So, I think that people are fairly compliant, and I think when we start posting the list and see that, people can look and say, well, here's 2016, and by the time we get to 2018, I can look at all those. Are the same people on the same list again and again? That would present a problem. And when we see those inspections or investigations that are consistently in violation, those businesses, then we say, okay, that's the time. We've been out here on the 6th inspection, and you're still not getting it right. That's the time we would go to the Attorney General's office for formal administrative action. So, but I can tell you from my experience that that's few and far between that we actually get licensees who are not compliant with inspections that rise to the level of administrative action. Does that help explain?
So you just mentioned the GPL. How do the inspections work? Does somebody go out there to be a potential consumer to see if they're presented with that option, or?
We don't do undercover stings.
Okay.
Every inspection that we do has a protocol, and every field representative uses that protocol, and they look at everything in that funeral establishment. They ask to look at the GPL, the CPL, all of the consumer disclosures, all of the documents that they're required to provide. They also look at what we call service files. So they look at something where the family's been served, and it's all over with, and they will pick random files from there and look in those files and say, were they provided with this? What's a contract look like? Were all the disclosures presented? So based on all of that, that's how they conduct their inspections. Okay, any other questions on that? Okay, so let's move on. Number 4 is our update on legislation and regulations, and I've asked Cheryl as our legislative analyst to talk to you about
legislation that's going to become effective January 1 that is either related to or directly impacts the Bureau. So, Cheryl?
So we have about 6 bills that are going to have some sort of impact in the industry. The first is Assembly Bill 1658 from Assemblymember Bigelow. This will authorize the Happy Homestead Cemetery District to inter residents of specified Nevada communities if they meet specific conditions. And so that is actually the communities that are in the state of Nevada that are right along the border. If they meet the conditions that are determined, then they can choose to be interred in California at this cemetery district. And that adds Health and Safety Code Section 9063.3. The next one is Assembly Bill 2859 from Assemblymember Lowe. This bill allows all programs within Department of Consumer Affairs to establish, by regulation, a system to issue retired licensees for persons that are not actively engaged in the practice of their profession with specific limitations. That adds Business and Professions Code 464. The next is Senate Bill 66 from Senate Member Lefebvre. This bill will require Department of Consumer Affairs, in accordance with state and federal privacy laws, to provide specific licensure data to the Chancellor's Office for California Community Colleges in order to measure employment outcomes of students who participate in career technical education programs that are offered by community colleges. So this will amend Business and Professions Code Section 30. Senate Bill 1179 from Senate Member Bedek. This bill will do 4 things. It will establish that within a public cemetery district, an interment right is transferable property interest. 2, it requires the owner of an interment right at the time of purchase to determine a successor in writing. And 3, provides employees or trustees of the public cemetery district immunity from liability for any claims, losses, or damages resulting from transferring an interment right. And last, it provides the circumstances and process under which human remains may be disinterred, reinterred, or removed from the public cemetery district, and what records must be maintained. This will amend Health and Safety Code 9002, and it adds Chapter 5.5, commencing with Section 9069.10 to Division 8 of Health and Safety Code. The next is Senate Bill 1284 from Senate Member Hernandez. This bill allows the conservator of a person or the conservator of an estate to control the disposition of a decedent's remains when a decedent's next of kin fails to act on interment rights or cannot be found. That will amend Health and Safety Code 7105 and obviously directly impacts our industry. The last one is Senate Bill 1348 from Senate Member Canella. This bill requires Department of Consumer Affairs programs that accept military education, experience, or training to post that information on their website. This amends Business and Professions Code Section 114.5. And we do have some information already on our website about military personnel, and so as part of that requirement, we will review our website to make sure that we are compliant with that section. That is it for the legislation. Does anybody have any questions on the legislation?
Just one question on the Happy Homesteaders, AB 1658.
Yes.
It seems year after year, for the last 7 years, there's been this move towards to expand the reach of district cemeteries into the public domain in competition with private cemeteries. Has there been any talk about, and at the same time, it seems that it's increasing the amount of consumers that have access to, quite frankly, non-regulated cemeteries outside the Bureau's reach. Has there been any discussion about a position from the Bureau regarding these as they seem to move forward? Because it feels like by the end of the next couple of years, there'll be every district cemetery that's open to outside of those people who are paying the fees and taxes associated with the advantage of being in the district itself.
So as a bureau, we are not allowed to take a position on legislation. In order to do that, it's a very lengthy process. We would actually have to go through the department's legislative policy review office, and we have to get approval through the governor's office. So as a general rule, we are not allowed to do that. I do know that not all of them that get proposed get through. There was one last year that, there was 2 proposed last year. One was passed and the other did not. And I can't recall off the top of my head which districts those were. One was, I believe, in Auburn, but I don't know if that's the one that passed or not. This one is a little different because it's actually adding a new section to the health and safety code. The previous one, it was amending a section of health and safety code. There was some limitations on those as well. It was up to like 400 total, I think a limit of 40 per year.
And this one didn't have a limitation on it.
Yeah, this one is a little different. It is a separate piece compared to those others that were allowing non-residents into that specific cemetery district.
But there's no one with any oversight to regulate whether or not there's 40 a year, or who's keeping track of when it reaches 400, or they stop, and there doesn't seem to be any access, any requirement for them to even report the number of interments as they go forward. So it just seems very loose in the way they approach this. That's just my opinion.
I also asked at the first meeting that I attended if there were definitions in the Business and Professions Code or anywhere else in the regulations of some of the kinds of cemeteries that are not under the jurisdiction of the Bureau. And it didn't seem like there were definitions, like what's a fraternal cemetery.
I don't know if that specific definition, there are definitions, certainly cemetery related in the health and safety code. I don't know if
There's a list of about.
yes, but you're right, I don't think it specifically says what is a public cemetery district means this, or a fraternal cemetery means this. So, yeah, I don't think and that would, in order, those definitions would have to be defined, and through legislation, sections would have to be amended to include that, so.
So if you want that to exist, you need to find a sympathetic legislator to propose legislation and pass it.
We would work with our legislative division and work through them.
I mean, I actually don't mean you.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, it's going to take a legislative change. Somebody who believes that, yes, it's necessary, or, we look at, is it a consumer protection issue going forward, and
Is there a lack of clarity on that definition that's going to overhand or prohibit the Bureau in order to effectuate its specific duty? So if there is a lack of definition, what's the harm, if any, to the Bureau? That's usually what's going to happen before there is going to be any position regarding making a legislative change. That's done by the department for the Bureau. So.
Well, now, that would be a reason for the Department of the Bureau to take it up. But what about a person from the public?
exactly.
That's what I meant.
And we believe it or not, I mean, we get quite a few inquiries over time that people say, I want to see this change, what can you do? And it's, our response is that the Bureau is not going to, we don't initiate our own legislation unless it's for very specific reasons like Angela described. And so we tell them you need to find a legislator to sponsor a bill. Sometimes we tell them check with your industry association if that's what you're looking for. Maybe they will take that up for you, but it is something that they have to go forward with. And I've seen individuals in one or two instances able to just grab the attention of somebody. We might get a call on it of inquiring about a certain issue, but for the most part, those individuals who want to do that have to find somebody who's going to carry that legislation for them. Okay, any other comments on legislation? Oh, you've got to finish regulation. Yep. Okay.
So for regulations, at our last meeting, we presented the annual pre-need trust fund report and
For the funeral side.
And we only received a couple of very minor comments. We're moving forward with preparing the regulatory package to submit that rulemaking file forward. We will not be bringing that document back here in this meeting again because we will not be meeting until after we hope it's actually been through our internal review and out to Office of Administrative Law. However,
other one had to do with state-run veteran cemeteries, and there's only 4 of them in the state, and it talked about rules for disinterment and then rights to control disposition and fees. Yeah, I can get those numbers if you
Were
would
those
like to have
regulations or statutes?
regulations?
Okay,
No, CCR.
okay.
Any other comments? All right.
All right, so let's move on to our 5th item, which is a presentation by Dan Eds. He's with Capital Accounting Partners. You may recall that he was here at our last meeting and went over some draft findings of a fee study that the Bureau has been involved in to evaluate our current fee structure and look at any changes that are necessary. So he had some preliminary information last time, and those of you who are here know that we had problems with our projector, and you'll see that that will never happen again. His report is complete now, so I'm going to turn it over to him to go through his presentation. I also have Taylor Schick here, who introduced himself earlier. He's a budget officer for the department. So between the 2 of them, they will provide some information or answer any questions that you might have. So, Dan, welcome.
Thank you. And if it's okay with you all, I'm going to stand up here this way. So I'm looking at you rather than cranking my head around to try to see you. Again, I'm Dan Eds with Capital Accounting Partners, and it's nice to be with you again. I think it was August or July? July. When we were here together, and I think I was standing up here last time. So in the interim period, we have gone through and we've updated all of the budget numbers, all the salary data, brought the analysis from fiscal 15-16 to current budget year, which is 16-17. And we also had additional time to go back and do not rework the analysis, but to make sure that we had our I's dotted and T's crossed. So with that, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. The presentation outline is pretty simple. There's really 4 parts to it. One is to review the scope and methodology of the project. Number 2, kind of look at the current state of the Bureau. Number 3, look at the future state of the Bureau. And then finally, some recommendations and next steps. And by the way, this is a fairly high-level overview. It's not designed to be intensely detailed. If you want to get into the details of the analysis, I've got my computer and spreadsheet open, and we can get into the nuts and bolts or the weeds as deep as you might want to go. I also have a place at the very end of the presentation for questions, but certainly if you have a question, please stop me. I could prattle on here forever talking about this stuff. So please feel free to stop me. I actually am probably more comfortable if this is more conversational than public presentation. So, next slide, please. There you go. So, project scope. Calculate the full cost of processing licenses for cemetery and funeral establishments, as well as the individuals. That's pretty basic. We are looking at the cost of processing licenses. And so that's sort of the first order of business, if you will. The second order of business is to calculate the direct cost of processing licenses and the allocation of support costs, such as investigations, enforcement, and other functions that may apply. And there's really 2 pieces to this. One is to calculate the direct cost of processing licenses. And simplistically, this means we're looking at the direct labor cost, salaries and benefits. We're looking at, we're developing a productive hourly rate for each one of the major positions. We're allocating onto that services and supplies, basic pens and paper and utilities and all that kind of stuff. And then and I'll show you this in a minute, we're simply saying, okay, how much time does it take to process any given license? And so that becomes the direct cost of processing licenses, which in these kinds of projects is really the smallest component of cost to an individual license. The second piece of this equation is the allocation of support costs. And I'll get into this more in a minute. But it's these support costs, such as investigations and support, that's really the largest components of cost and how we allocate those costs can have a fairly material effect on the end result or the final analysis of what any individual license may cost. And then finally, develop revenue and fee projections for 10 years for the purpose of setting the caps. Any question about that? Okay, next slide. The analysis does reflect the merging of the two funds. Next slide. So the process of doing the analysis, and I might be the only guy on the planet that gets excited about this kind of stuff, but I happen to believe, and Cheryl might interrupt you. Okay. I think I'm one of these guys, and doing these projects, I believe that the process is as important as the outcome. So we have a fairly well-defined process that we use in doing these kinds of projects. One is to calculate the full cost of services. That sounds kind of simple, and usually it is. Basically, though, it's saying, okay, what's the budget? And do we have everything calculated within the budget? Are there other incoming costs that may not be within the budget this year, but maybe in the budget in 2 or 3 years? An example of that would be the cost of exam development. The Bureau doesn't pay, Lisa, correct me if I'm not saying this quite right, but the cost for developing the exams doesn't hit the budget every year. So it becomes like a cost we need to allocate. The core business processes, identifying the core business process, determining relationships between business process and specific fees, basic process analysis, and then allocating the cost, the support costs to the individual fees, and then thirdly, looking at the price. Many times when I do these projects, the final price that the organization is going to charge must by law be no more, can be less than, but no more than the actual cost. Bureau isn't under that regulation, so there's some pricing flexibility, if you will. That sort of becomes the last step. Next slide. All right. Some basic assumptions within the analysis itself. One is that the budget expenses will be spent. So there's $5 million of budgeted cost. We're going to assume that all $5 million is going to be actually spent. However, due to Lisa's conservative fiscal management, I think the history is that most of the time, all of the budget expenses or the allowable expenses are not actually spent. Number two, activity as measured by the number of licenses will remain consistent. Now, this is really fundamental to the analysis itself. So I'm assuming that if there is 25 25 annual licenses that are renewed of a very specific type every year, the assumption is that that's going to remain fairly consistent. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One, it drives some of the quality checks that we've got to make sure that we've got good data. It allows us to project revenues. It also allows me to project, to compare my projection of current revenues with actual revenues to make sure that there's a match. Any question about this? Okay, next slide. So, in doing these projects, I'm frequently asked, so how do you know if you're getting good data? How do you make sure that the data that you're getting, the core analysis, that it's actually correct? How do you make sure that, not that anybody on the Bureau side would ever try to fudge the numbers, but how do you make sure that nobody's trying to fudge the numbers? And so we have some quality checks. So here we've got resources available. That's $4.5 million of budget expenses. Resources assigned, projected revenues at full cost. So that's basically saying, do the inputs or the outputs match the inputs? So if I've got $4.5 million of budget expenses to work with, when the numbers flow through the Excel spreadsheet and we're coming up with the actual cost of fees, I need to account for $4.5 million. And the model is such that if I don't account for exactly that amount of money till like the third or fourth digit past the right of the decimal point, I get these flashing red lights on the Excel spreadsheet. So it reminds me that the difference has got to be 0. Okay, that makes sense? Y'all are really quiet. Another test, if you will, is total hours available. So in this model, I've got 41,558 hours. That is simply the total number of FTE and the staff, and we're multiplying that by 1,776, which is the standard number of productive hours on an annual basis that the department uses for all of its boards and bureaus. Basically, it's 2,080 hours less vacation time, sick leave, holiday time, and all that. So if I've got 41,000 hours coming into the model, by the time I account for everybody's time, I allocate all of the cost and everybody's time, I need to come out of the model 41,558 hours. So I've got a match, okay? And again, as long as that number is 0, actually as long as both of those numbers there are 0, I'm a happy camper. The model says we're good. Any question about this so far? Okay, moving on. So projected revenues from fees at current prices. This is my projection of fees from current prices, $3.6 million. And the math is pretty simple. It says how many of these licenses have been processed in the last 12 months. Multiply that times the actual price of each one of those fees. We do the math, we add it all up, and we come up with $3.6 million. What's not included in this is citations and any other revenues that may be coming in from the budget offices, from money sitting in the bank, and that sort of thing. So I also then need, again, to make sure that it's, good data is flowing into the model, so I've got good results flowing back out. So that is my projection of revenue. That's actual projection of revenue from fiscal 15-16. The difference is $134,000. My standard range is 5 to 10% plus or minus. I'm at -4. I'm a happy camper. It tells me that the dollars coming in equals the dollars going out, or dollars going out equals the dollars coming in. Again, it's another test to make sure that the data that I have is solid data, it's defensible data, the results are good, solid numbers, and I like to say we're not just throwing numbers in an Excel spreadsheet and shaking it 3 times and out comes the results. But these results tell me that I've got good data going into the model. All of the final numbers are going through my quality checks to make sure that the results are solid. Finally, in this particular project, we developed a pricing model, and so we need $4.5 million to cover all of the budget expenses plus expenses for exam development. So in the development of a pricing model, we needed to come up something pretty close to that. We came up with $4.5 million, an additional $6,000. Again, so all that is saying that we've developed a model, a costing model, that captures everything, that's gone through at least 3 tests to make sure that the data is solid, and then we're projecting out revenue based on a pricing model that Lisa established, and that everything matches up a slight overage of $6,000. Any question about this?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
What pricing model did you use?
Okay.
How do you decide that?
Okay, good question, and I'm going to turn part of that over to Lisa. But let's just say that we established a cost of $200 for any individual fee. Pick one. But that doesn't mean that you actually have to price that fee out at $200. Could be lower, could be less, based on any number of factors. And Lisa, do you want to add any?
Yeah, when looking at those things, when it says this is the cost of it, what we're currently charging, it wasn't me independently, it was the Bureau's management team and staffing and all of that. And I'll just give you, for instance, let's say the annual special care fund and endowment care fund and special care fund has no fee associated with there. We don't collect a fee when somebody files the report. But there is something in statute that says when you're late, we're going to charge this late fee, that we must do this. There's a significant amount of work that comes that my audit staff must do when those reports are received. So we looked at that and said, does it make sense that we should be collecting a fee for that? So that's kind of where we started, where we were. Same thing for the annual funeral pre-need report. There's one fee if you file a master trust report, and if you file an individual one, it's the same fee. So we looked at that and said, should that be adjusted? So that's kind of where we started and went through, and we looked at the amount of work and the time that it takes to process a license or an audit report, or it included what an inspection involves. That, you know, we are mandated to conduct inspections of cemeteries, crematories, cremated remains disposers every year. That's travel time. That's all of those things factor into that cost of that license. So that's the kind of methodology we used.
Is there any social engineering associated with license fees relative to what, for individual licenses, as to what income may be available? Example, let's just assume, and maybe this is a faulty assumption, that processing a license for an apprentice embalmer and processing a license for a funeral establishment take about the same amount of time. So is there any social engineering where we would think that we'd want to keep the cost down for someone who might not have the resources like an apprentice embalmer for a fee? Let's say they could both cost $200.
Right.
You know, do we ever think of charging $300 for the funeral establishment, $100 for an entry-level position for licensures for social?
We did try to take all of those considerations in, all of those factors into consideration. The one thing we looked at, it's funny that you say that specific licenses, it's a one-time license, there is no renewal fee, but somebody has up to 6 years to complete their apprenticeship. So every year, that is reports coming in, there's activity associated with that. But we still try to be mindful of what do we think a license might be able to support versus business and individual. And I don't mean to digress or take away, but just so you know, everybody knows, this is the absolute basic starting point in looking at our fees. We can't proceed with anything until we have this fee study. After that, there needs to be legislation to set the caps at whatever they are. Right now, I think all but 2 license fees we're at the maximum that we've been able to charge. We can't even go and say we need to increase it slightly without having this done first. And what we're trying to do, because we did pay a fair amount of money to contract with somebody to complete this for us, to say we'd like to raise those caps in statute so we don't have to go back and do this again. Then we will go through the rulemaking file to actually set what those fees should be. So I think as we go through this, one thing to keep in mind is this is the very, very first starting point. And just because you see a cap up here over 10 years doesn't mean that's where it's going to be set. We want to allow for some flexibility over the next 10 years without having to come back and do this again. So.
Thank you, Lisa.
So the line item for what currently has come in, and what is it, 6 months or is it a year? Is what, 1 or 2 on there? Or is it not on here? That's why I'm a little, I get your second to last line item where you're looking at making sure that the costs are covered based on the time and all of that. What I'm wanting to know is what has been coming in, like previously.
Coming in.
Literally, what's the money that's been coming in?
That's the 3.6.
Okay.
That's our actual
Okay.
revenue that came in.
That's the actual revenue that came in.
Yeah, I'm looking for this. Yes.
My projection is 3.6. The difference is probably timing. And so the difference between the two is 134, almost $135,000.
And the total hours available on the sign, I assume that if you had less hours assigned than were available, it would be because you had a position that wasn't staffed.
Well, that is actually budgeted staff. So if there's a position that's not filled, or it's filled halfway through the year, then the actual number of hours that are productive and workable, if you will, would be less than that. That assumes that all positions are filled all of the time. So that's the only place we can start from. Good question. Anything else? Okay, next slide. This is, again, it's a big picture overview. So if we've got $4.5 million of cost in the model, and we've got projected revenues of 3.6, that leaves us with $914,000 of somehow cost that has to get recovered somehow. Okay. Any questions? Next
This
slide.
is over 2017, or this is over your 10 years?
This is 16, 17. Good question. All right, so the other thing that we did, we looked at, and these are some of the core activities, if you will, or business processes that are involved, and we looked at the cost for each one of these, and as you could see, investigations is a huge percentage of the total, along with Attorney General's costs, and even things like driving, travel time for inspections. You go to the next slide. I'm sorry, go backwards if you will. I'm sorry. The point of this, and I'll touch on this in just a minute, the whole process for investigations and enforcement and discipline is a huge percentage of the total cost. What we discovered here is they're consistent with the other boards and bureaus for the department that I've done. Roughly 50% of cost or more is involved in some kind of investigation, discipline, action, or part of, or organization within the individual board of bureaus. Now go to the next slide. This slide actually shows, these are actual numbers from the model, and it shows how the analysis is actually made. So this is for a funeral establishment annual renewal fee. 1.2 hours is the total processing time of processing one of these licenses, and that comes from anybody who's touched it. So if we say that there's 2 people, 3 people, 4 people may touch this individual license, that 1.2 hours is the total of everything. So it's not just a person who may actually physically handle the paperwork. $59.36 an hour is the average productive hourly rate for those positions that touch that particular fee right there, and that includes salaries, benefits, again, an allocated percentage for services and supplies, pencil, paper, pencil, all that stuff, and the number of productive hours again is 1,776. Gives us a total direct cost assignment of $71. Okay? Then we're allocating on top of that the cost for investigations, travel time, establishment, because this is an establishment, the customer support for establishments, customer service and program management, the bureau administration, and then the department state pro rata. That gets layered on top of that, the direct cost. It's very much like a layering effect. So the total cost for that individual license is $307. Any question?
Is it okay to public question? The DCA overhead or administrative costs, do you have the information on like what the total amount is and how it fits into the overall scheme? I know the reason I ask is different bureaus and boards and commissions and DCA have percentage of fees that when the legislature looked at analysis, between 45% and 20% of the licensure fees actually went to DCA for its administrative costs. I'm curious how that fits into here.
I could show you the budgeted number. I would leave it up to Taylor though to answer the question of actually how that gets calculated. If that's
part of the 914,000 that we're under in terms of revenues coming in versus cost for the current fiscal year, and how that fits in, is that considered a cost in this whole chart, or is it considered something else? I'm not quite sure where it all fits in. That's all.
Well, Taylor, correct me if I'm wrong here. But the pro rata cost is part of their budget. Every year they get charged a certain amount of money from the department and as well as the state. And that becomes part of their budget. So what I'm doing, I'm saying, okay, it's X number of dollars, whatever it is. And then I'm looking at allocating that cost out on a reasonable basis, either direct hours or total cost or labor cost or some kind of a number that says, you know, how do we reasonably, rationally, intelligently allocate this cost out?
Wasn't it on your slide, like 2 slides ago, on the third bar, was the bar chart? You didn't have it pro rata as a percentage?
Yeah, I think it probably was.
Okay, yeah,
But
I think it was like a 20-some percent.
Okay, thanks.
So I mean,
There you go, okay.
you know, basically the department charges the bureau overhead cost. Just like most of our businesses, finance is going to charge the guy that's building the widgets some kind of a number. Good question, though. I
I
appreciate it.
didn't see that bar. so
Yeah, it's
thank
on the
you.
bar
Yeah.
chart, I think.
Okay,
2 slides
thank you.
ago.
Okay. Any other question? Next. So this actually is the pie chart that shows 48% of total cost is consumed in the old investigations and AG costs. And this would be the direct cost. So when the department, says, here's your cost for some piece of investigation, we're layering on top of that all of the overhead. So 48%, 52% for all other costs. This would be the direct cost. It would be some of the overhead cost. So it's all allocated out. And again, that 48%, very consistent, even on the low side of what I see in other boards and bureaus. Any question? Okay. So what I'm trying to do here is show the impact of enforcement costs. So this is a cemetery salesperson, original license. $92 is the total cost that we've calculated. $39 of that is enforcement costs. So it does have a material impact. Next slide. Again, we're looking at revenue comparisons on more of a global basis. You see right here, this is the full budgeted cost that we've established. This is the revenue for the pricing model, a difference of $6,000. Current revenue, projected revenue is $7.6, means there is a loss of $920,000. The pricing model that has been established recovers that additional cost. Any questions? Next slide. Recommendations. Lisa's already mentioned this first one, raise the cap to cover regular fee increases for 10 years. So what we did, we took the cost and then the pricing model that Lisa and her team established, and then we took those prices and we added a 3%, sort of 3% CPI inflation factor kind of a thing. Went out 1 through 10 years. So what Lisa was saying was set the cap, if I'm saying this correctly, set the cap at the 10-year mark. Not that you're going to, or not that the Bureau is going to charge that much today, but set the cap at 10 years and then adjust fees through the regulatory process on more incremental steps. Now, this is one that I cannot overemphasize. I do enough of these kinds of projects. I've done enough of them for the department. I do them for cities and I do them for counties. I've got a sort of upscale homeowners association thing that I'm doing right now up in Oregon. The single biggest problem that municipal clients, state clients run into is they don't adjust their fees on a regular basis. I've done these for the department where we haven't adjusted our fees in 20 years. I wonder why we're in a sort of a financial crisis. I've seen fees not being adjusted for as long as 25 years. There's going to be an impact of that. I've seen cities and counties that don't adjust their fees for 15 and 20 years until the state comes in and says, oh, we're going to start fining you for not providing this service, and then libraries have to get shut down because they're not charging enough for fees. So I get a little bit excited about the whole idea of adjusting fees on a regular basis. Most of us get at least incremental wage increases now and then. It just makes sense that fees need to keep up with the general cost of doing business. And then finally, establish the pricing guidelines and values. Again, pricing of an individual license doesn't have to actually equal its cost. But in my worldview, if it doesn't equal cost, there needs to be some general values. Really, Darren, what you were referring to, is there a social engineering? Never used that particular word for this kind of exercise, but is there reasons why we may want to lower the cost for one type of license and raise it for another? And that, I think, is a very important factor. I'm now done with the presentation. I thank you for it very much. Just as a word, I've thoroughly enjoyed working with Lisa and Cheryl and their staff. They've been outstanding to work with. We've got a great group of folks here. So I'll take any final questions. I'll be back.
You didn't do any projections over the 10 years?
Actually, I did, but they're in the analysis. Do they have the...
They don't have the final report. We just recently got his final report. I wanted to be able to provide this presentation and information. The final report is available. It will be posted to our website. It is a public document.
So what we did, we established the cost of every individual fee. And then Lisa and her team went through and said, well, okay, sometimes the price is the cost, sometimes it's not. And then from that price, we then, it's a pretty simple analysis. You just multiply times 3%, add it all up. In 10 years, we have a number. Then the recommendation would be to set your caps at that number.
I'm just wondering how the impact of the market and I don't know the answer to that exactly, but I just know that, cremation is now the new tradition. There's less burial. And I don't know how it's impacting the Bureau in terms of the amount of work or if you look back and if you looked forward to see if maybe that might be a factor in terms of this percentage. There's social engineering, but then there's also, where the market's headed.
There's always market forces, if you will, that drives this kind of analysis. It's pretty typical. 1 year everybody is going to be buying some kind of a new license because it's a new license and everybody has to get registered for it. And then for the next 10 years, there's very low numbers. One thing that I cannot do is look forward into a crystal ball and say, okay, we think instead of processing 100 of these licenses in the next 10 years, that number is going to go down to 5. That gets really hard to do. The other thing is what I observe many times is there's ebbs and flows and peaks and valleys, and even though one particular kind of license may drop down in frequency or in activity, generally speaking, there's another one that's going to pick up. And the whole idea of setting the caps is really to say, through the statutory process, here's the cap, set that. Now, depending upon the needs for revenue, matching costs with expenses, then Lisa and her staff, they've got the flexibility to say, okay, we need to raise this one, keep this one the same, so that the end goal, the final objective is that there's revenue to pay for the expenses.
Yeah, I just didn't know if that would provide enough play there based on, where things are headed, so that's...
Well, and then the other thing too is, the state can always come in and add a whole new body of regulation. And that's pretty hard to predict. At least I can't predict it. But, if there's a whole new body of regulation, and then Lisa and her team are going to have to get cranked up and, okay, how's this going to impact on actual prices of fees? And, that happens, I've seen it happen enough that you just need to be aware of it might happen. Thank you.
And just to add, I've been with this Bureau since 2000, and it became a program under the Department of Consumer Affairs in 95, 96. I don't believe that fees were raised have been raised during this time period at all. I think we're looking at 20 years since we raised fees. And again, I can't stress enough that this is just step one in a long process, and being able to set the cap so we don't have to come back here. We may not reach the cap.
Well, I was gonna say you might need a higher cap based on the fact that the market becoming less, just in terms of maintaining what you need to do.
Well,
I'm
and
just
even-
throwing that out there, I don't know, that's.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but even if the market changes, I mean, we've identified how long it takes to complete a crematory application. Whether we do license 25 or 200, the process remains the same until there's some statutory regulatory change that says you have to do something differently. So whether we're doing 1 or 5, but that is an area that we looked at as well. What could support an increase, or what might be able to support an increase, how many we're doing, businesses versus licensees, or individuals rather. So again, we need to work with our legislative and regulatory division to go on to the next step. There have to be a statute change to put that cap in, and then we're going through the rulemaking file. So even though we have years 1 through 10 now, I don't know where we'll be when we actually get to the point where we're going to look at making the fee increase. But I know that we have to have this before we can even move forward with any sort of statute change, and that we had to project out so many years and set that cap so that we're not right back here in another 10 years or 20 years. I don't think this Bureau should be looking at its fee structure every 20 years. I think it needs to be more consistent in that, raise, lower, whatever might need to happen, but we need a starting point, and this is where it is. So.
To give you an example, your 3% compounding interest over 10 years, it started your expenses at $4.5 million, now it would be $5.6 million at the end of 10 years. So it's taking you $4.5 million this year. 10 years now is going to take at least another $1 million more to operate in the same fashion. As you say, nothing changes.
Yeah, that's kind of assuming no regulatory requirements come in, changes in demand from the process.
And 3% holds. Right now it's much lower than that, but who knows would be.
I'll let you gaze into your crystal ball. Figure out where inflation is going to be in 5 years.
So when you talk about the regulation changes, that could be something from the statute, or it may be a new process that the Bureau has to, as an example, like the alkaline hydrolysis. If that all of a sudden became a test and a license for the business and manager or whoever, that would be an additional expense that isn't necessarily being considered as a part of this.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I wonder if this is the same question that was asked. I'm sorry, I had to step off it. Did anybody manage to attend the local for commission meeting that you had announced?
Not at my level, at the higher, the executive level, there were some participation by executive staff.
Were they talking about the possibility that we're trying to license too many different kinds of things?
To be honest, I'd have to go back. I looked at the report, it was quite lengthy, and I know there were 6 or 7 recommendations. I don't recall off the top of my head specifically.
Because it strikes me that that's their thrust, and we might be going in that direction. And I think
That there's too much regulation.
That there are too many different kinds of licenses that are necessary to do too many different kinds of things.
That sounds vaguely familiar to me, and what I started to read it, and it's like I said, it's like 60 pages, and I went back to the recommendations.
Is
So
it possible to get a copy of that report? I very much wanted to attend that meeting, but I was unable.
I think it's a public document.
I'm not quite certain if it is information available, but I want to be sure that we're not going too far into that area of over versus keeping it a fun piece.
But I think that's germane to this conversation, because I think there's a thrust for what you were talking about, like not so many people getting so many licenses, which may have a budgetary impact.
I will check on that for you.
There's actually a really simple way of dealing with either new regulations coming in to drive cost up, or fewer to drive it down. If your labor cost goes up by 5% due to additional regulation, you don't raise everything by 5%. That's a bit of a broad brush, not a technical analysis, but if it happens on a quick, interim basis, it's real easy to do that. Same thing on going down. Now, if there is a major material change in regulation, more or less, then my recommendation would be to say, okay, let's go back and take another look at this. Do the analysis over it. But, don't do it unless there's a material need to do it. Any
Anybody
questions?
else? Any more questions for Dan or even Taylor Schick, our budget officer?
Hearing none, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 6, public comment on items not on the agenda. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to make any public comments about issues that are not on our agenda? You may do so at this time. Please state your name and the name of the organization or association you represent if applicable.
If you would like to state your name and the organization, you're free to do so, but you're not required.
Yes.
George Prather, current legislative chairman for the California Film Directors Association. I wanted to let you know that we'll be seeking legislation in 2017 to deal with supervising embalmers for apprentices. Given the rate of cremation is now, the last couple of years, 62% in California, we find that less and less embalmings have been accomplished. And to that end, a funeral establishment may not need a full-time embalmer, thus maybe making it difficult to have an apprentice. Many years ago, the State Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers allowed one time a person to have what we call a trade embalmer, act as a supervising embalmer to an apprentice, and she ended up getting a license. We would like to see that happen again, and we're not sure exactly how the structure of how it should be, but we are going to develop language to that effect and then give them to the Bureau for your comment and then go forward with it.
Thank you. I know that, and we can't have a discussion on this because it's not on our agenda, so, thank you. I was familiar with a little bit with that. It's not the first time I've heard it surface, so I appreciate the information. Is there anybody else? Okay. So let's talk, committee members. I want to look at our next meeting in May, and at this time, I'm looking at May 16th, 17th, or 18th. So we'll be in contact when we have the exact date, but I wanted to know if any of you knew right now if you had any conflicts with any of those proposed dates. Yes.
I can do it on the 16th or 17th, but not the 18th.
Okay, so not the 18th. And of course, keep in mind that I have the other 3 committee members who aren't here to ask as well, but it seems to be much easier to schedule your calendars when we do it further in advance than waiting later. So if you're not sure right now, you can just shoot me an email when you know your availability, and then let's look at May 16th or 17th. It would be the same time. I'm always open to changing it to a later time if we need to accommodate. This seems to work, but I'm not opposed to having it in the afternoon if we need to, and I'm not opposed to looking at other dates. For our purposes, sometimes where we find difficulty is we have to reserve these conference rooms well in advance, so that's why we throw out several days. And to be honest, we reserved all of them in case one of these worked for you, but I don't want to tie up the room unnecessarily for other folks who might be using it either. So if none of those dates work, then we'll look at, we can look at the week before, the week after. I know we're getting into the only holiday there, for us anyway, is the 29th is Memorial Day, which is the 29th. So I don't want to go too far into the week before in case people have the week before off or the week after. But right now, I think we're pretty flexible in May, so we can kind of look at your schedules. You just need to let me know what works and what doesn't work. Okay, anything else? Well, I thank you very much for your attention and your attendance, and it is now 5 minutes to 12, and we will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much for attending, everybody.